The call came at 6:43 on a Thursday morning. I know the exact time because I just set my coffee down and was watching the steam rise off it when my phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Is this Nathan Calloway? Yeah. This is St. Benedict's Medical Center. We have a Gerald Calloway here. You're listed as emergency contact. He's been stabilized, but you need to come in. Heart attack. 61 years old. Alone in his office when it happened, which meant he'd been on the floor for almost 20 minutes before his assistant found him. I was in my car in 4 minutes. I drove to that hospital telling myself he'd be okay, that he was strong, that we still had time for all the things we'd been circling around for years and never quite said. What I didn't know, speeding down that empty highway in the dark, was that by the time I walked into that hospital, the business my grandfather had built, that my father had grown, that I had poured 12 years of my life into, was no longer ours. It had been gone for 6 weeks, and my father's new wife had the paperwork to prove it. Let me tell you about Calloway Fabrication. My grandfather Earl started it in 1971 out of a garage with one welding torch and a debt he paid off in 3 years. By the time my father Gerald took it over in the early 90s, it was a regional manufacturer with 40 employees. By the time I joined at 24, fresh out of an engineering program, it had 83 employees and contracts with 3 major industrial clients. I didn't join because I felt obligated. I joined because I loved it. The smell of the shop floor, the problem solving, the feeling of making something physical and real. My grandfather used to say, "We don't sell promises, we sell parts," and that stuck with me. I worked my way through every department: shipping, procurement, quality control, sales. By 30, I was operations manager. By 34, I was effectively running day-to-day operations while my dad handled relationships and big-picture strategy. We were a good team, different but complementary. Then my mom died, and everything shifted. My mom, Carol, passed from a stroke 3 years ago. She and my dad had been married 38 years. He did not handle it well, which I say with compassion, not judgment. He became someone I didn't fully recognize. Quieter, less present, making decisions impulsively, emotionally, in ways that weren't like him. 6 months after Mom died, he met Sandra. Sandra was 53, twice divorced, and ran what she called a lifestyle consulting business that, as far as I could ever tell, had no actual clients. She was polished in a careful way, the kind of polish that takes effort to maintain. She laughed at everything my dad said and called him Jerry, which no one in his life had ever called him. My dad brought her to Christmas 8 months after they met. My sister Pam and I exchanged a look across the table that contained an entire conversation. They were engaged 4 months after that. I said everything I could reasonably say. I told my dad I was happy he wasn't alone. I told him I had concerns about the speed. I told him, once, carefully, that I thought he should consider a prenuptial agreement given the business. He told me I sounded like a lawyer, and Sandra wasn't interested in the business, she was interested in him. I let it go, because what else do you do? He was grieving, and he was an adult, and he was my father. They got married in Cabo. Pam and I were not invited. We found out from a Facebook photo. That was 14 months before the heart attack. He was going to be okay. That's the first thing they told me when I got to the hospital. The damage was real, but manageable. He'd need surgery. He'd need months of recovery, but he was going to live. I sat with that for a few minutes in a waiting room chair, let the relief wash through me. Then his cardiologist pulled me aside and said, he was asking about the business before we sedated him, something about paperwork. He seemed agitated. What kind of paperwork? I said. The doctor shrugged. He just kept saying, Nathan needs to know about the paperwork. I'm sure it can wait until he's recovered. I sat back down. Nathan needs to know about the paperwork. Sandra arrived 40 minutes later. She walked in with sunglasses on, indoors, and went straight to the nurse's station without looking at me. When she finally turned and saw me, she did a thing with her face. A smile, but with something behind it, something calibrating. Nathan, she said, how is he? Stable, I said. They say he'll recover. Good, she nodded, smoothed her jacket. I'll need to get some things in order for the business while he's recovering. And there it was, the thing in her face. It was relief, not about my father, about the timing. I felt a cold understanding move through me, slow and certain as a tide coming in. What things? I said. She smiled. Let's not worry about that right now. This is a family moment. I am the family. What things, Sandra? She looked at me for a long moment. Then she opened her purse, took out her phone, and pulled up a document. She held it out. Jerry signed the business over to me 6 weeks ago. Full ownership transfer, notarized and filed. I'm the sole owner of Callaway Fabrication. I looked at the screen. I looked at her. He was mentally competent and fully informed, she said, in a tone that told me she'd rehearsed this. I have his signature and the attorney's certification. I handed her phone back. Okay, I said. Okay? She seemed thrown by my calm. Okay, I repeated. I'm going to go sit with my father now. What I didn't do? Scream, cry, accuse her in a hospital hallway, or make any move that could be described later as unstable or aggressive. I maybe had 30 seconds of blind rage in a bathroom with the faucet rigging. Then I washed my face, looked in the mirror, and went into a mode I can only describe as operational. I called my cousin Derek from the parking garage. It was 9 a.m. I need an estate and business litigation lawyer, I said, today. Nathan, what? I'll explain everything. Can you make calls? Yeah, I'll make calls. By 2 p.m., I was in the office of a woman named Sylvia Marsh, who had 20 years of experience in exactly this kind of case and the kind of focused, unhurried energy that made me feel, for the first time all day, like I might actually be okay. I laid out everything I knew, the timeline, the marriage, the transfer, my father's state of mind after my mother's death. Sylvia listened without interrupting. Then she said, "When did his behavioral changes begin after your mother passed?" "Almost immediately," I said, "within a few weeks." "Did he ever see a doctor about it? Depression, cognition, anything?" And that's when I remembered something. About 8 months after Mom died, before Sandra, before any of this, my dad went to his GP because he was having trouble sleeping and concentrating. I'd gone with him. The doctor noted concerns about cognitive processing and referred him to a neurologist for evaluation. My dad went to one appointment, said everything was fine, and never followed up. But that first appointment existed. Those notes existed. Sylvia looked at me steadily. "If we can demonstrate that your father was experiencing cognitive decline at the time of the transfer, that he lacked full legal capacity to make that decision, the transfer can be challenged, possibly voided." "Is that realistic?" I said. "It's not a sure thing," she said, "but it's a real argument, especially if the transfer was executed quickly, with limited independent counsel, by a spouse with a clear financial motive and no prior connection to the business." She paused. "How fast did she move after the wedding?" I counted backward in my head. 14 months married, transfer filed 6 weeks ago. 8 months, I said. She waited 8 months. Sylvia nodded slowly. "Not so fast, it's obvious, but fast enough." She folded her hands. "Let's get to work." The next 4 months were the hardest of my life, and that's including the year my mother died. My father came home from the hospital not knowing what Sandra had done, or at least that's what I believed. I've since revised that belief. I think he knew. I think he signed those papers in some fog of grief and loneliness and trust, and then spent 6 weeks not letting himself think too hard about what it meant. The heart attack, I think, cracked something open, hence the agitation, hence Nathan needs to know about the paperwork. I visited him twice a week during his recovery. Sandra was usually there. We were excruciatingly polite to each other. It was like a nature documentary, 2 animals maintaining careful distance, each waiting to see what the other would do. What I was doing? Building a case. The neurologist's notes from 3 years ago showed documented concerns about executive function. 3 of Dad's longtime colleagues provided statements that his decision-making had been noticeably impaired in the 18 months after Mom died. Unusual agreements, forgotten conversations, uncharacteristic impulsivity. His personal attorney, not the one who'd handled the transfer, a different man who'd worked with our family for decades, told Sylvia that my father had never once discussed transferring the business to Sandra with him, that the transfer was handled by an attorney Sandra found, not one he had a prior relationship with. And Sandra's finances, which became relevant during discovery, told their own story. 2 bankruptcies, a civil judgment from a former business partner, and a pattern of relationships with older men of means that a jury would find extremely easy to understand. My father broke 6 weeks before the trial. He called me on a Sunday night. Sandra was out. His voice sounded like it had when I was a kid, and he'd done something he needed to tell Mom about. Ashamed, smaller than usual.